I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We begin this morning with the race for the White House and President Biden's imperiled re-election bid following last month's shaky presidential debate.
Democratic lawmakers have been holding closed-door meetings on Capitol Hill this week. They're expressing their concerns about the president's chances of winning a second term, but the president insists he is not stepping aside. Yesterday, New Jersey Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill became the latest House Democrat to call on Mr. Biden to bow out of the race. And Colorado Senator Michael Bennet became the first sitting Democratic member of the Senate to say publicly that he thinks President Biden cannot win the election. Now, this is all happening as Mr. Biden faces a new public test on the global stage. He's hosting world leaders in Washington at the summit, marking NATO's 75th anniversary. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now with the very latest. Ali, good morning. So walk us through what came out of these closed-door meetings. I mean, what are we hearing from both Congresswoman Sherrill and Senator Bennet? And just what's the overall mood among Capitol Hill Democrats?
It felt yesterday, frankly, standing outside that House Democrat caucus weekly meeting, like the mood was very much a collective sigh. This is not a dam-breaking moment. Members didn't flood out of that meeting ready to call for Joe Biden not to be the nominee anymore. Instead, we did see two new House Democrats either voice concerns in the instance of Congresswoman Trahan or outright say, as Mikey Sherrill did, that Biden should no longer be the nominee. But I actually thought that what was more encapsulating of the current mood about Democrats, and if you put back on the screen that list of where House Democrats are, there's a man who's got his own column, and it's Congressman Jerry Nadler, was against Biden, at least privately. We reported that. He didn't dispute it, and is now publicly supporting him, saying to us yesterday outside the meeting, he's going to be the nominee. Basically, it doesn't matter if I have concerns, Biden is the guy. And that's because the organization against him is not organized. And as one lawmaker put it to us, that means the advantage goes to the president. But that doesn't mean that there's not concerns. Listen to the way that Senator Michael Bennet is putting this in dire terms. And he's the first Senate Democrat to come out publicly and go this far. Watch.
Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House. And so for me, this isn't a question about polling. It's not a question about politics. It's a moral question about the future of our country. And I think it's critically important for us to come to grips with what we face if together we put this country on the path of electing Donald Trump again.
That's a serious warning from a serious senator. At the same time, it doesn't go so far as to say, because I have these electability concerns, Joe Biden should drop out. No senator has said that at this point. No member of leadership has said that at this point. And that's probably what's keeping people at bay at this point, too.
How is the Biden campaign responding to all this, Ali? And by the way, tell us about Democrats that have actually been coming out in support of the president.
I'm glad you point that out, Savannah, because by and large, most Democrats are supportive of the president, if not resigned to the fact that the longer that this will he or won't he goes on, he will be the nominee. And many people are aware that I've spoken to, lawmakers on the Hill, that he's dug in on this and that the people who could potentially be persuasive to him are also still publicly in his corner. That really does matter. But the Biden campaign, in response to Senator Bennet and also this larger concern about what polling trends show, the Biden campaign says this was always going to be a close race. And of course, that's definitely true. Of course, for senators, for lawmakers further down the ballot, there's also selfish concerns in this, which is they want to be able to keep the Senate. They want to be able to keep their seats. They'd like to be able to retake the House. And there's concerns about a drag on the ticket, this idea that the person at the top isn't going to be able to bring the excitement, bring the voters, and bring the Democratic energy that would allow them to keep the Senate, take back the House, and, of course, maintain the White House. And that's where the concern comes from. It's not just a question about Biden himself. It's about the role that a president plays in a year like this one, where the balance of power in both chambers, and we've seen the ramifications of this time and again, everything is so razor thin that there's concern about even losing a few seats in either chamber. And certainly losing a few seats in the Senate would mean they lose the Senate. It's just a 51 balance and a 51 majority there. The concern and the panic is palpable, but it also might not change anything.
Ali, amid all this, the news is also making news. I want to ask you about some comments from ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos. He was caught on camera saying he didn't think the president could serve 4 more years, just days after he interviewed him. What more are we learning about this?
Yeah, this was on TMZ. He passed someone on the street. Stephanopoulos, seemingly walking in workout clothes with headphones on, was passed by someone on the street in Manhattan and asked, hey, you've talked to the president more than anyone lately. You interviewed him. Do you think that he can do it? And Stephanopoulos in that video said he doesn't think he can serve 4 more years. Of course, someone reached out to Stephanopoulos, confirmed that it was him. He said he responded to a passerby on the street, shouldn't have done that. But certainly this is another twist in the story, a reminder that it's not just lawmakers now who are airing their concerns or even thinking about what the implications of that Biden interview and that Biden debate are, but now the very man who did it himself.
All right, Ali Vitale. Ali, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali. Well, despite all the questions surrounding his candidacy, President Biden still does have official business to attend to. He will welcome NATO leaders to Washington later this afternoon.
Yesterday, the president delivered opening remarks at an event marking the 75th anniversary of the alliance. He told the audience the United States would continue to defend Ukraine in its war with Russia.
NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist joins us now. Aaron, good morning. So many see the summit as an opportunity for President Biden to prove to his doubters, as well as allies, that he can still lead on the world stage. How did he appear yesterday, and what did he have to say so far about NATO?
Yeah, I think in the remarks he gave last night at the opening ceremony for the summit this week, the president seemed strong and forceful in his comments. Obviously, it was a speech that he read from, but at the same time, it was one that was well delivered, as we heard applause from people in the room several times while he spoke. The thrust of his comments really were, as you noted, the importance of NATO and the fact that it must stand up to support Ukraine in the war against Russia. I want you to hear a little bit of what the president had to say with regard to his support and NATO's support for Ukraine.
Ukraine can and will stop Putin. Today, NATO is stronger than it's ever been in its history. When this senseless war began, Ukraine was a free country. Today, it is still a free country, and the war will end with Ukraine remaining a free and independent country. Russia will not prevail. Ukraine will prevail.
Now, we understand that there will be an announcement from the larger NATO organization about additional support, increased funding and military support for Ukraine. The president last night, for his part, announced that there were going to be additional Patriot missile batteries supplied to Ukraine from the United States, donated, as a matter of fact, from the U.S., Germany, and Romania. Just part of what we expect to hear from the president in his support for Ukraine and really trying to rally the rest of the world to continue to support Ukraine's efforts as well.
There's an expression, all politics are local. Perhaps this week, all politics are international. So, Aaron, walk us through what's on the president's schedule today and over the next few days. I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges he's facing? Just how much pressure is he under to deliver here?
Yeah, well, let's start with local. The president will go to the a meeting of the AFL-CIO leadership that's happening here in Washington today. That's a campaign stop. Right after that, he heads back to the NATO summit at the convention center here, where we know that he will participate in at least one working session that's happening today. Later on today, he'll have his first meeting with the new British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, on the sidelines of the NATO summit before he and the First Lady host the attendees of the NATO summit at the White House for a dinner. And you're right, there still will be a lot of attention focused on the president, both in his ability to just sort of hold up in these spaces. It is going to be a long day with a lot of meetings, a lot of heat here in D.C. as well. And so people will be watching just to see if he says anything that's sort of off, that would be an indicator of any concerns that people have been expressing in the last several weeks in particular. People will be watching him physically to see how he holds up in these meetings and whether he seems to be rising to the occasion of being a head of state and hosting the leaders of more than 30 countries here in Washington.
And
Joe,
Aaron,
Savannah?
on that topic, yet again, yesterday we reported about these visits to the White House by a Parkinson's specialist. There's been some back and forth here, a neurologist as well, about when that happened, why that happened, and then sort of some dissonance with what we had been hearing from the press secretary. Yet again, the White House has tried to clarify this. What is the latest?
Yeah, there was a question asked of the press secretary by the Associated Press yesterday in the briefing at the White House, and it was about whether Dr. Kennard, the neurologist that you mentioned, had met with the president's physician because they were talking about the president. And the statement that we got at the briefing yesterday was no, that was not the case, essentially. And then the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, put out a statement late last night looking to clarify, as we understand it. She said, because the date was not mentioned in the question, I want to be clear that the January 17th meeting between Dr. O'Connor and Dr. Kennard was for the president's physical. It was one of 3 times the president has been seen or has seen Dr. Kennard, each time for his physical. The findings from each exam have been released to the public. So that clarification coming from the White House, trying to explain again why that neurologist was there and was meeting with the president's physician. This meeting happened before the bulk of the president's physical at Walter Reed Military Hospital, and the release of those details that came shortly after that.
All right, Aaron, thank you very much.
Speaking of NATO, leaders of those NATO countries are keeping a close eye on the 2024 elections and the looming possibility of a second term for former President Donald Trump, all as the future of the war in Ukraine hangs in the balance.
Yeah, former President Trump has yet to give his plan for addressing the ongoing battle, only promising to win the war, quote, before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after we win the presidency.
NBC News correspondent Von Hilliard joins us now with more on the Trump campaign. So how much is the potential for a Trump return to the White House impacting what we're seeing with this NATO conference this week? And just realistically, I mean, do we have an idea of how Trump returning to the White House could impact the war in Ukraine?
Right. There's a stark contrast in approach to NATO from Donald Trump versus the current administration. Donald Trump this year has suggested that if NATO member nations do not put enough money to their military defense as part of their GDP, that the U.S. should send a message to Russia to say, do the hell whatever you want, that the U.S. would not defend those NATO countries from any Russian aggression here. Donald Trump has suggested that U.S. aid to Ukraine should be pared back and has said that he would end the Russia-Ukraine war in one day. But it's not clear how he would do that. Some close former allies of his have proposed a military proposal that would force Ukraine to make some concessions of some of their territory to Russia in order to reach that peace agreement here. And for Donald Trump here, some of his closest congressional allies, including like Marjorie Taylor Greene, have said that the U.S. should not care what happens to Russia or should care what happens to Ukraine. And Donald Trump has suggested as well that there are some serious questions about whether the U.S. should remain militarily and financially committed to Ukraine.
Let's talk about next week as well as last night. Next week, we've got the Republican National Convention. Of course, that'll be a big deal. Last night, we had the former president hosting an event in Florida where he did sort of hint potentially could we see a Rubio ticket here with him. We still don't know the running mate. What did we learn about that and anything else at this event in Florida last night? Right.
The Republican National Convention in Milwaukee begins this upcoming Monday here. So the anticipation is that the VP announcement would come sometime before then. It was potentially going to happen last night in Doral in Florida. Senator Marco Rubio was there. Donald Trump repeatedly made reference to him in the crowd. I want to let you listen to Donald Trump specifically talk about Marco Rubio as potential VP.
If he's not chosen, would he play a role in your administration?
Well, he certainly will, and he's a fantastic guy, and he's a friend of mine, and he is one of the top people. And let's see how we do over the next week, but probably over the next week or so, maybe even at the convention.
His next political event is this Saturday just outside of Pittsburgh. And then, of course, Donald Trump will head to Milwaukee for the convention.
Speaking of VPs, all this attention around President Biden is shining a spotlight on the current Vice President, Kamala Harris. And it appears Mr. Trump is taking aim at her. What's he saying?
Right. We've been to a lot of campaign rallies, and we've listened to a lot of Donald Trump speeches over the last year, 2 years here. And largely it's been focused on Joe Biden. This go around last night, it was a little different. There was a lot more forceful comments towards Kamala Harris, suggesting that this administration had put her in charge of the border and questioned the effectiveness of her efforts to stem immigration into the United States. He made the direct reference that Joe Biden can't drop out now because referring to Kamala Harris as an insurance policy for him, that the Democrats would not want to choose to go with her because her chances would be even worse than Joe Biden's to beat him. So Donald Trump last night, he used that, his first campaign appearance since that Atlanta debate, he used that as a moment to celebrate what he called a resounding victory over Joe Biden and a knockout blow.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vaughn. Well, today in Texas, there's growing concern for people's health as cleanup from Hurricane Beryl is now fully underway. Well, more than 1.5 million people still do not have power, while some of the hardest hit areas are getting scorched by a dangerous heat wave. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has the latest from Houston, where the heat index could hit 103 degrees today.
Good morning. We have made our way to another hard-hit neighborhood here in Houston, entering day 3 with no power. Already this morning, it's feeling quite muggy. The highs will likely climb into the 90s once again. The heat index reaching the triple digits, a heat advisory in effect until later on this evening. Some residents here who do not have power say that inside their homes, it feels more like a sauna. Across Houston yesterday, we saw a lot of folks cleaning up and then fueling up as well. Long lines at gas stations and fast food restaurants. Meanwhile, this morning, still more than 1 million customers here without power. CenterPoint Energy, the main utility company here, says that a third of its customers have the power restored, but the timeline for full restoration is still unclear at this point. Meanwhile, it's not just Houston dealing with this oppressive heat. More than 120 million people coast to coast dealing with this extreme heat. New York included, dealing with 5 consecutive days in the 90s. Las Vegas breaking a record yesterday, 119 degrees. Meanwhile, in Northern Virginia, in Fairfax County, an apartment complex there had no AC. The company saying that the cooling tower went down. They are trying to replace it, but some residents said that it also felt like 93 degrees inside their apartment unit. And as Beryl continues to move on out of here, a final blow in the Midwest. We were tracking tornadoes that respond, specifically in Indiana, left a path of destruction. So lots of powerful storms already this summer, and of course, that extreme heat that we're tracking as well. Back to you.
Right, Kathy, thank you.
Let's now get a closer look at where the remnants of Beryl and all that heavy rain are headed. Time for your morning News Now forecast.
That means Angie Lastman's in studio with us. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hey, guys, good to be with you. We are not done talking about Beryl just yet. It is just remnants now, but it's still causing problems across parts of the country, specifically this morning, the Great Lakes. But by later this afternoon and even late morning, we'll see some of that moisture working into parts of the Northeast. So no surprise, flood watches. There's a lot of moisture still associated with this system. Quite a soggy morning across the Great Lakes, so those flood watches will remain up through the day today. The system is on the move. Notice what happens by the time we get into the late afternoon and evening hours tonight. We'll see much of that draped across parts of New England, stretching down towards the mid-Atlantic. We'll have kind of the steady, really good drenching rain in some spots that, of course, need it. But we'll also see the potential for some strong storms to develop from this, specifically in parts of Pennsylvania and New York as the day goes on. By tomorrow, it gets stuck. We're talking about a stalled front that's hugging that coast. This is going to leave us still with some storm chances from mainly the Carolinas up into Maine. It won't be quite as heavy of a rain, but it'll still be impactful when it comes to getting stuff done and being outdoors. Here's the area we're watching today for the severe weather. Again, much of the Northeast included in this, and we will see the greatest chance of some of those strong wind gusts, so over 60 miles per hour. But we can't rule out the tornadoes. We know how active the system has been when it comes to tornadoes over the past couple of days. We've still got that potential into the afternoon and evening hours tonight, so we could likely see several tornadoes in this region. The good news, I guess, out of all of this is that the hail risk is low, so we don't have to so much worry about that, but we will still be dealing with the flooding concerns. And notice that the flash flood risk is at a moderate risk, especially across parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and New York, Burlington and Rutland included in that, but it's quite expansive. Maine all the way down to Pennsylvania and, of course, the Great Lakes, still going to have that potential for flash flooding as the day goes on. Some significant rainfall in some spots. I think widespread amounts, 1 to maybe 3 inches, but localized spots could get up to 5 inches. So we'll be watching for the flooding concerns across that region. And the heat, no surprise. I mean, it has not gotten better. As promised, we still have these heat alerts up for the bookends of the country. The East Coast dealing with the heat and the humidity. So we've got mid-90s for Raleigh, Washington, D.C., Charleston, down to Jacksonville. But look at those feels like temperatures. 108 is what it'll feel like in Washington, D.C. today. Charleston at 108. And these temperatures don't really improve over the next couple of days. Atlanta stays into the 90s through Saturday. We've got mid-90s on Friday in Nashville, even warmer on Saturday. And even Richmond, you do dip back into the 80s, but it doesn't stay comfortable for very long. We'll still see plenty of humidity, too. And the West Coast continues to roast. We've got 118 for Las Vegas on Thursday, guys. Palm Springs expected to head to 121.
Oh. I would like to put in a request to turn the heat off. Do I do that through you?
I do have a direct line to Mother Nature, so
right.
Whatever comments, concerns, complaints, I'll take.
Oh, is
let
that
her know.
so? Okay, we'll remember that every time we're not happy.
Not shy.
Thanks, Angie.
Of course.
We're learning new details about an alleged carjacking in Washington, D.C. that involved the security detail of a Supreme Court justice. An armed 18-year-old suspect allegedly threatened 2 U.S. Marshals who were assigned to Justice Sonia Sotomayor's security detail. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin walks us through what police say happened.
In Washington, D.C., an investigation into an alleged carjacking attempt near the home of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. According to the Metropolitan Police, it happened hours after the 4th of July fireworks on this block in the heart of the Capitol. 2 deputy U.S. Marshals charged with protecting Supreme Court justices were parked outside when the suspect, identified as 18-year-old Kentrell Flowers, allegedly armed with this firearm, approached one of the marshals and pointed a handgun at him in an apparent attempt to carjack him.
According to police, the marshals opened fire. The suspect survived, taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries.
It's the latest in a series of high-profile carjackings to strike the Capitol. Late last year in nearby Georgetown, 2 teenagers were arrested for allegedly breaking into a Secret Service car assigned to protect Naomi Biden, the president's granddaughter. Local residents say they're not surprised by this latest violence near Sotomayor's residence.
Do you feel safe?
It comes and goes in waves.
Still, for the first time in 6 years, carjackings in the Capitol are actually down 46% compared to last year's spike as police crack down.
While we have not reached our destination, we are on the right path.
A source close to the investigation tells NBC News they believe this attack was random and not related to the Supreme Court justice. The suspect has yet to enter a plea. Back to you.
All right, Aaron, thank you.
Well, closing arguments are set to resume this morning in the federal bribery trial of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. The jury will likely begin deliberations on Thursday, as closings are expected to take a few more hours today, with lawyers for the other defendants making their arguments.
Senator Menendez is accused of accepting bribes in the form of cash and gold bars in exchange for political favors. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash were discovered during a search 2 years ago of Menendez's home. He, along with 2 other businessmen, have pleaded not guilty to bribery charges.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas joins us now on this. Danny, good morning. So let's start with the prosecution. And just for example, those gold bars that Joe just mentioned. So part of what they said here is, oh, his wife, Nadine, she had hid them somewhere. He didn't even know about them. What are your other big takeaways from what they argued?
I've defended these kinds of federal bribery cases, and the defense usually takes a similar recurring theme, and it's this. The prosecution can usually show benefits on both sides. Here they have gold bars going to the senator, and they also have allegedly benefits the senator provided through his official acts or through his office. You almost never have a written contract. Hey, I agree to bribe you in return for your official acts. So the government knows they need to prove that by inference. So on the defense, no surprise, that's the argument. Hey, this was not a quid pro quo. These are just gifts from really, really generous people that have nothing at all to do with each other. It's an uphill battle. I've tried that argument. I've rarely been successful. Statistically, most people in federal court will be convicted. So I would say that the senator goes into closing arguments, and you see the gold bars right there, which, by the way, are the star of the show, not the senator. The gold bars have been something that has really made this case a compelling one for the government. The senator is definitely the underdog going into closing arguments.
Well, bars are what made headlines as soon as we heard about all of this. So Menendez's lawyer accused prosecutors of portraying the senator as Scrooge McDuck swimming in gold coins, saying prosecutors are making half-truths in their closing arguments. What do you make of the defense's argument? What do they have to do to try and win this?
As defense attorneys, we don't get to pick our facts. The government does, and particularly the federal government gets to cherry pick only their most favorite set of facts to take to court. So no surprise here that sometimes the defense is making an argument that feels like a stretch. Yes, is he Scrooge McDuck swimming in gold coins? You know, there's a risk the jurors may go back there and say, He kind of is, because in all my years on Earth, I've never dealt in gold bars. I've even heard of Bitcoin and other ways of paying for things. But gold bars is something out of the movies from another era. So I don't get that. And when jurors don't identify with a defendant, they feel more comfortable convicting that defendant.
Really good point. Walk us through what you're looking for as closing arguments in today, and then this heads to a jury.
Like I said earlier, there really is only one avenue when the government puts up evidence of so many benefits on each side between people who know each other. You have to basically argue, and it's already been argued, that this is just coincidence. This is somebody that felt like giving a senator gold bars, and the senator just felt like, in his own independent judgment, doing something that just happened to benefit the citizen who gave him those gold bars. It can be a stretch, but you never know. Some juror might be receptive to it.
Just need one.
Just need one.
Danny, thanks.
Ideally more.
So much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.